So as I mentioned, my name's Richard from Biomimicry Innovation Lab. I'm here to talk about the nature of systems and how systems are being used by designers and engineers and innovators around the world to look at a variety of different ways to solve unique challenges. So that's me, beginning of the lockdown, a little bit less stressed. And I set up actually Biomimicry Innovation Lab back in Christmas Day last year, 2019. I decided that having run Biomimicry UK's non-profit, more of outreach, as we started developing more consultancy work, it felt that it should be a separate company. So why not on Christmas Day I thought I'd register the company. Alongside that, I run with a team of brilliant people, Smart Stable Limited, which we're looking into a variety of equine health technologies with also plant science as well. And I also volunteer for the Circular Economy Club, running the York events on a semi-regular basis. Now, where did I all began with my kind of interest in that? It wasn't hiling cows, or healing coos as like to say up in Scotland. It was actually just learning about the environment from my grandparents, spending summers in the west coast of Scotland. We've always lived near the sea or in rural areas, and I kind of learned about the complexities of the interrelationships, interdependencies, and the trade-offs between the variety of things. And you learned about the wonder of nature as well as the cruelty of nature as well. And that's where you really delve in to understand about this. What Darwin talked about, not the survival of the fittest, but it's about how each piece of the jigsaw fits in to that environment. So it's fittedness, so to speak. And that's a very important point that we can take forward. And this kind of led me to pursue a variety of careers, looking into where I was working real estate finance development, and then retrained in urban design, and kind of delved back into kind of looking to the nature. And I like solving problems. I like learning about lots and lots of different things. I just absorb it all, from chemistry to biology, learning about behavioural economics, nudge theory, through to delving into exploring the vast world of big data, AI, and complexity science. But this thing that really drives me is creating things that work better, actually also better for the planet. You see so much waste. Example being, how much food we waste in general is about 30%. So imagine going to buy a pair of jeans from the shop, and as soon as you get handed them over, well, first of all, wow, you'll be in a shop again because we'll be out of lockdown. But secondly, they'll hand over a pair of jeans and then chop off 30% of the legs, and that's almost redundant. But that's the same kind of thing. Imagine all the energy that's gone into making those pair of jeans. It's the same thing with the food, from the growing, especially if the meat, when you've not just got the cow, but also where the grain is grown as well, and all the supply chains, the energy that goes in that as well. So my main focus these days is kind of looking into cities, manufacturing, and food. These kind of have come about through development of projects, people speaking to us, and kind of developing this kind of team and building a super team mentality. And imperfect. For those people who have just joined on YouTube, there should be sound available. And if there's definitely no sound, please do actually, let me know on the chat. I've got my iPad next to me. And also, please put comments, Nick, on the Spinup page. And sorry again about this. So one of the key things we're finding with uptakes in technology is actually this great quote by one of the advisory board for Biomimicry UK, is that innovators look around for fresh ideas. And with advances in technology, we're able to understand the natural world like never before. In essence, biology, which biomimicry is rooted in, is very much infant science compared to a lot, and we know a small fraction about the natural world, being the variety of species and things like that. So in today's journey, I'm going to take you through what is biomimicry. For those who don't know, if you do, it's a fresh update, summary of infrastructure, and looking at how biomimicry can help relate to that, and also manufacturing as well. Then we'll have a short Q&A session where I'll pick out some comments that are actually on Spinup on the website, and I will hope to answer some of them. So what is biomimicry? Well, biomimicry is really a way to look to how nature solves problems and then translate those into our technical solutions. Now I like to explore it very much starting looking at the systems, then delving down into the processes, and then after that looking at the functions that are actually all interlinked. This allows you to embed systems thinking into the mix as well, where you're not only looking at systems but you're analysing the system of the problem at the same time. And when I talk about systems, I'm not just talking about looking at an ecosystem. You're going everywhere from starting off a biological system, so if you think about the hierarchy all the way down from your cells all the way up to your the skin and your human body through different varieties. There's lots and lots of biological systems interacting there, through to living systems where you've got the interaction between the living and the non-living. So you're looking at the water cycles and the carbon cycles and all these kind of elements in the natural world, and then into the ecosystem where you've got the bigger complex system tied together. Now I want to imagine when you're talking about biomimicry, we also you quite often hear about talking about function, but everything in the natural world, including us, are multifunctional. I want to look at your hands and start playing around with the skin, seeing what happens, the systems and the processes there. If you pinch your skin too hard, you're getting a pain receptor sending that signal all the way back and forth to the brain, and the skin will bounce back. If you pinch it far too hard, you'll end up cutting it, but over time it will self-repair. And look at the way the skin, try pinching it in the palm of your hand compared to, the back of your hand is a lot less flexible, it's thicker, it's tougher, but that's solving a different purpose than the skin on the top of your hand as well. And it's an interesting way to explore it. You start exploring the hand as a grappling. You can pick up a cup. You can very softly pick up a pine cone. You can make a fist. You can wave to people. You can cover your mouth when you're coughing, which is very important at the moment. Now it leads me on to one of the companies that have really been making a difference over the years, especially when we start talking about health. Is a company we started out looking into how do we decrease the drag on Navy ships for the US, and by looking around to various animals. There's a long, lovely story here, but basically by biofouling, by the chemicals that then attach to the barnacles and other living debris effectively to the underside of ships, that slows them down and therefore have to use more fuel to move around the world because they're less drag resistant, and from that then you have to spend time cleaning that off. But they start looking at how can they look to an ocean going animal, and one of the great ones is everyone thinks of sharks as fast moving all the time, but a lot of them are very slow moving. But yet, unlike whales, they don't have as many parasites on them, and this is due in part to their skin, which is almost like a little armour. So when you look under a microscope, they're effectively like little teeth, these little denticles, and the way that they it's actually growing actually inhibits the link of bacteria and other funguses that onto the skin of the shark. Now researchers in America from this looked into it, right, can we create a material from this? So they weren't just looking at, right, can we replicate it exactly, because to replicate kind of the randomness and the order of that, you would need a very, very expensive manufacturing tool. But they started looking into what are the mathematical relationships here. So they started looking at the ridges and the valleys, and from that they understood that they actually could then design something that'd be a lot easier to manufacture based on this, and all these little diamond patterns that allowed them to put this material onto, for example, it could be phone screens, door handles, tie clips, inside of catheters, they're even now working for putting them inside of contact lenses. For the spread of germs, it's very, very important, this type of material. There's another example if you're looking at it. And this is, it's a plastic that can be put onto a variety of materials. But in health-wise, you're not just talking about shark skin. When you're looking at water filters based on aquaporins from plant cells and the transfer over of water to filter out other non-water particles. Or even research now, I'm reading about the study of llamas and certain type of llamas, how they actually minimizing their antibodies found in their bodies are actually allow them to not capture as many viruses and germs. And other things down to looking at super hydrophobic surfaces, super slippery surfaces. The example from the lotus flower and the lotus leaf and how the water runs off. Other properties there for painting the side of houses or cars or anything that allow the water to trickle off a lot easier, or anything else that sticks to it. And thank you for commenting and letting the other people that say they can hear me on YouTube. Perfect. And again, I do apologise for this. So what about looking at innovation in general? There's a whole variety of examples out there, from computer processors for converting digital to analog that were developed in the 1950s, looking at processors from squid, through to another health application for looking at a wasp ovipositor, wood wasp, and how it lays eggs for carrying out surgery and very delicate movements, to creating wind turbines based on the bumps on the humpback whale. And there's a variety, a mass myriad of things, even things down to displays on digital monitors and phones inspired by butterfly wings, to take it further into a variety of designs. It's just about scaling it up and moving it forward. So we are seeing a huge an effect. I'm stealing from the documentary, the world of solutions out there, and it's about tapping into them. I'm not going to be a naivist and say everything can be useful in our technology. I mean, research done about 15 years ago in Bath by university academics there found that there's only a 12% correlation between how nature solves a problem and we do. So actually it's great that it solves a problem, overcomes challenges, is evolved in nature, but translating it and making it relatable to what we do is very, another matter entirely. Now there's a whole myriad again of kind of ways they do this, and for every trend or principle that is talked about, nature contradicts it depending on the situation, whether you're talking about scarcity of food to extensive heat or stressors on the environment. But the key things you're seeing is very much multifunctional. I talked about that earlier when we're looking at hands. Again, there's a lot of self-repairing capabilities, from everything in your skin to tree branches to materials regrowing itself. Again, I mentioned a hierarchy. The hierarchical structure is not only found in bones but in your body as well. And this hierarchy is not generally found in the man-made world, apart from occasional built structures, a bit like the Eiffel Tower. Another key thing here is nature, or the natural world, tends to not optimize as much as it is very much resilient. So it doesn't optimize its kind of resources, it's more resilient to changes and adapting to it. So that's why you're finding species that are able to overcome flooding or loss of food more as a collective than anything else. And also the key thing, it also runs on information passing through genes, reproduction, information passed by signaling, species interaction, cross-species interaction, and things like that as well. But one of the key elements here is really delving into this complexity science and understanding how everything is kind of meshed and linked together, and how changes in one can affect the other. And that kind of very much leads on to this kind of looking at kind of infrastructure and what is into a city and the manufacturing, how there's, you can't just say I'm going to improve this, but what about that? That's where you're looking at the interdependence. If you improve one thing, you need to improve another, but then what's the trade-off to another thing? So you've got this kind of whole systems model and complex interrelationships that you need to consider when you're solving a problem. So let's start talking about some infrastructure. So as an urban designer, we work, and in property, infrastructure is effectively, it's the built capital compared to the natural capital you've seen pictures of. And it's things that roads, it's everything you use as you go to work or you go out to the shops and then come back home. We're using infrastructure at the moment through internet and connectivity and things like that as well. And one of the key things that's come out of this, again, through another one of my advisory board members, is actually how do you then start looking at kind of this infrastructure, but also consider the systems level. And this great quote again from Professor Julian Vincent. And we should stop thinking just about biology. So it's great to look at a picture of a panda and think it's amazing, but you got to start thinking, how does it solve a problem or doesn't solve a problem? Because it's not perfect by any stretch of it. Means it's got a very short colon because it used to be a meat eater, but it's not set up for eating bamboo, where it needs a long basically gut tract to actually allow it to break down the food. So there's a great example there of nothing's perfect, it's continually changing. So what we really need to do is start for biomimicry and biomimetics, actually really understand how it's solving the problem, but where in the process or a part of the system it is actually connected together that solves the problem in the most effective way. So infrastructure, we're always considering the grey infrastructure, the buildings, the roads, the car parks, the sewers, everything else connected to that. But one of the key things we really should start looking into, I apologise that's not working, is actually looking at not just the city but the city region, and actually start thinking about, isn't the infrastructure just as important by looking to the natural infrastructure as well, bringing in these as they're called ecosystem services back and connecting this to the city. So you're actually looking at, where does the water come from? Is the water just come in pipes, or no, it's actually coming from rivers and waterways, and how important are actually building in these green, parks, green infrastructure networks. You've got ecosystem services running through cities that allow the movement of plants, seeds, or animals to actually then disperse and populate and continue and increase the biodiversity of the places. So it leads me on to the work that I know that a few other speakers have been talking about, is the planetary boundaries. This is very much about the interlinked relationships, and I won't go on in detail because I'm sure you've all read a lot about this, but the key element here is the planetary boundaries. Is scientists around the world looking at how can we then looking at interrelationships, not just for climate change, but actually talking about how can we access to free fresh water, are we polluting that more? And it's the key thing here is actually looking at, if you create a system model of these, how does they interdependence together? What happens if you're polluting farmland and actually then runs off, it's polluting the water on the soil but into the river? Then that could actually have an impact into the land system change and also into the ocean acidification. And then what happens if then that water then starts evaporating and going to the sky? Then you've got other ones tied in there as well. But closely linked to these is the Sustainable Development Goals, and these are very much earmarked, especially it mentions in their website about individual you try and help solve. It's kind of a vision for the future. And for infrastructure, the way I see it is we should be looking at how to tackle industry, innovation, infrastructure. But as I very much in system thinking, we should also look at how the connection to sustainable cities and communities and life and land as well. Because one of the important things in a diagram that I've recently seen, it's been developed by the Stockholm Resilience Centre, also put together planetary boundaries, is this cake kind of model. And the key thing here is that it looks about how they all interlinked. And they initially developed it for food, but the way you look at it, and I'll zoom this out, is it's interlinking between them all. And the reason why, when I was mentioning before of taking cities and infrastructure and life on land, is they all should be interlinked. And you're almost seeing that as the original definition of sustainable development, with environmental, economic and social all tied in there and explained in a lot more clearer way. Now into some of the examples that have been created, looking at kind of systems and infrastructure. This is a artist representation of a project that's actually been developed in Jordan. It's not quite as this scale yet, but it's called the Sahara Forest Project. And this was initiated by Michael Pollan, who's a brilliant architect. And his idea was looking at kind of looking at a natural system and how could you connect them all together to make a more effective way to regrow plants in the desert. He's brought in examples of a seawater greenhouse that's basically using fans will blow moist air through filters and actually then filter out the salt to allow you to use that to irrigate the plants. He's even looked at ways to replicate how beetles collect moisture at night to then capture excess moisture in the air, because although deserts, arid regions are very dry during the day, they do actually allow for quite moist conditions in the evenings, even though it's very, very minimal. And he's tied this all together, and he's found that it actually can increase the yield of capacity of basically food sovereignty and the food security of places like Jordan and Qatar by basically turn them into be self-sufficient. Another infrastructure project, again, is actually being completed. It's called Lloyd's Crossing in Portland, and the idea was they were looking at how can we replicate a number of ecosystem services from a forest, and such as shading and biodiversity and water, and looking at the water cycle. So they looked at not just how the park would filter water, but tying it into the buildings as well, and making this all connect together. Another one's Lavasa Hill Station. This was co-developed with the Biomimicry Guild, and we're now called Biomimicry 3.8 and HOK, which is a big architecture firm. And again, this was a key element of actually tying this, kind of looking at an ecosystem model to actually understand how they all are interlinked together. But I touched on it, and I've been really pushing as I'm going through this, is kind of the point of like ecosystem services, and there's various definitions of ecosystem services, but you can break them down into 4 categories, from the supporting services, which are things like water, nutrients and soil, through to stuff like the provisioning, which is where we can get our food and fresh water from, and actually genetic resources, to actually how it regulates things by noise, pollination, and actually the regulation of water and filtering it through. And then the culture as well, so tying places where we can go and play and things can actually give us an aesthetic experience to these ecosystem services. And the key thing here is not one of these should be on its own. You're seeing connections there between the water, between 1 and 2 and 3. Actually, if you tie in the cultural side of things of connection to water, if you're thinking very much about certain cultures, actually the thing of rebirth in India, you've got that with the Ganges as well. So all are interlinked, and the idea is here you should actually start taking them and actually looking to develop them as a complex system to really analyse the interdependencies and trade-off as an ecosystem service with your natural and built capital together. And there's some researchers in New Zealand are actually doing exactly this. They've currently developed a model where they've just got almost 1,500 different interdependencies for looking at how biomimicry, so to replicate an ecosystem service for city infrastructure. Because, as I mentioned, we should start thinking about not just the city. I apologise, that skipped ahead. Is thinking about not just the city region. How does things in the city or before the city or anywhere we live link together, and actually then flow through the city, and then the city actually impacts it. So very much considering the city region, because lots of work has been done as kind of city feed itself. Well, very much Western cities, not a big metropolis, they don't have the carrying capacity of the land. There isn't enough land, there isn't enough people to do those jobs, unless we start thinking about urban agriculture and tie those things together to actually make it autonomous and things to do. So actually turning using the land in more productive ways. So now moving on to manufacturing. Now, well, imagine manufacturing. Think of manufacturing. It's skipped ahead there. I do apologise. There's this example here where we're heating or beating or treating our materials. We're pounding it into submission to make something generally smaller. When you actually think about factories in the natural world, you consider maybe, is that a factory? Maybe the seeds from that will then grow into a big tree. Not all of them will, because it's it's looking at kind of distributed. Although not all of our manufacturing is about subtractive models. We've got this kind of additive manufacturing really moving this forward. Is another it's a great way of manufacturing, although we are still very much using materials that can pollute the environment, even when you're starting to looking into the biomaterials. And some people have asked some very interesting questions, and I will actually get onto those in a few minutes, so thank you. So when we start considering manufacturing, you've got examples looking around the world from teams developing more effective hydrogen fuel cells by looking at hierarchical structures on either inside your lungs or trees. You've got materials where you're replicating the growth of coral reef with biorock, everything even down to looking at how do you create self-repairing materials that actually self-repair at ambient temperatures. An example being there, where you're actually looking into the mother of pearl, when you see that inside a lot of shells, and that's a very, very interesting material, which is effectively chalk, but just with some slight differences. It allows it to the animal then creates that material that actually then will fracture and then self-repair. Or examples of various elements looking into kind of the material optimization and bones. From example here, there's a little sparrow bone, little head, and very, very lightweight. I don't want to crush it too much. Even looking down into the growth of bones in our bodies, where the material is needed for strength, and then elsewhere where it's not needed as much, there's less material. And a great example of even taking that further, actually looking into these hierarchical structures and building in this ecosystem service, is a project called the Zero Waste Textile Factory. And the idea here is to make a lightweight, large factory complex in India that allows you to then building in the water cycles and everything in together to actually create kind of a factory of the future. How does this replicate various ecosystem services and allow it to have less environmental impact? You can even take this a step further to even looking into where the materials come from and the dyes and everything, and building a whole, I know it came out very much earlier, and one of the talks right this morning is a life cycle analysis looking into biomimicry. I mean, if somebody can do a life cycle analysis of a post-it note, you can do a life cycle analysis of anything. So I'm picking up on this again because it's an interesting area to go back to. Now, currently our 3D printers are passive. They are programmed and then they go about building, which is not what you see in the natural world. What if we could also replicate tying in elements of this kind of self-build, but also building in examples of energy transfers and energy waste, and actually looking at the energy flows between various food webs. So if you think about the energy movements and flows what actually connects them all together. Now I apologise, these slides are in the wrong order. One great example of this. Now ignore the fact that they're singular termites. These are fungus farming termites found in Namibia. What you're seeing here is effectively 3D printers. They're sensing the environment around them. In this case it's generally gas and temperature, moisture levels, and they just keep building until those conditions are settled again. And it's a continual, every single day they're constantly building over and over and over again. So what if we could actually replicate our 3D printers based on how termites, so you've got this active 3D printer, it senses as well as constructs moving around. So in essence you could, in theory, create a glass that's neither half full or half empty. If it was a living product it would always be just right. But I think about it, you could create structures, our bones grow in the same way by adapting, changing to the environment. If you do more running as you're growing up, you'll have your bones will get stronger and they're continually adapting. You're seeing that trees with wind, and so it's very much a case of rethinking the way that we actually work with 3D printers. I was actually asked to contribute to be a part of a team who are actually the 3D printing with termites to actually learn what they're doing as they're going along. The team that are working on that, they've been researching termites for decades, and this is one of the advisory board members, Dr. Rupert Soar. So to sum up, before I get onto some questions, there's a definition of a conclusions for you. One of the key things that we really need to consider is the complexity and looking at the interrelationships, even considering where about in the system we're solving the problem. It's not a case of just let's go look at that. We do have computers now, and whether it's building in systems models, you come from Kumu to 7 Vortex to any other of these, to then putting that into machine learning to actually then understand where the problem is, but also what solution will make the most impact throughout the system as well, instead of just running in there all guns blazing and spending your money on basically running down a rabbit warren by chasing patents or whatever, things like that. So the future of biomimicry is very back to what I was talking about, is looking very much at this as a big complex interrelated web. And one of the things that biomimicry does is it allows you to change the way you see things by delving into things a little bit deeper. Well, thank you very much, and let's get on to some questions. If you'd like to drop me an email, I'll stream this. I'll put this on our website. I'll put it onto YouTube afterwards, and then you can watch it. I'll turn on the comments as well, but trying to put the presentation together and setting everything else up is a bit of a nightmare. So let's turn on and read some of your comments. So the factory in India, that was called the Zero Waste Textile. It's in Northern. It's not been built yet. They're currently looking at ways to actually get that kick-started again. Myself and the lead designer were actually writing a book chapter on manufacturing and infrastructure, which we'll talk a bit more about that. But the practice of design is called exploration architecture. The question about using nature and energy efficiency for the growing plants in the desert, it actually didn't use that much energy, because I do apologize, I skipped through all that. It did use a lot of solar power to keep it going, and yes, it used some energy to filter the water, but I mean that's one of the issues or challenges that the design team would like to take forward to when they're scaling it up, is how could they make it net zero energy. Okay, another question. This person 13 minutes ago, an issue I think we find in climate and sustainability as a whole is how to convince people to bond with this complexity. It seems to be a large blocker. A standard we're reductionist and keeping it simple. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because it's one of the things we're currently working on, this large project looking at climate risk, climate change, and post-COVID societies. We've got 180 people there, and it is very, with 20 odd work groups from water to infrastructure to food. And the key things that always come out is the language you put across. People have to understand is it's not that came about in that quote, "Keep it simple, stupid." He wasn't meaning that. He's meant understanding complexity. I think what we need to get people understanding is how simple things can make a difference. And I do understand what you think. It's about touching onto what people believe in. And a friend of mine who worked for one of the big ad agencies, I asked him, how do you sell biomimicry? He says you don't mention it. You look at what outcomes you can get. Can it be made? Can it be fixed? So the engineers, and then what profits or cost reductions or any of the environmental things that you can put tangible figures on. People can buy into that, because we're very, very good, especially, and I'm sure everybody is in the sustainability sphere, of selling to ourselves. But we have to think, how do you sell this to somebody else? It is a selling exercise to convince them that this is a better way, and that's why you're seeing a lot of things of changing about the metrics about living buildings and this kind of thing, well buildings and creating places for health, because you can put a figure on it. And I think it's very much delving into that. We need to move away, especially with biomimicry, the romanticism of nature's are wonderful. It's only wonderful we can create a product that actually solves the problem better than it's already out there. If not, you're just creating a gimmick and it's greenwashing. There's a question from Gamma in South Africa. Gamma, since I know you and you're just going to send me a message, I'd happily answer that question, but I'll invoice for you first. No, I'm kidding. Any idea bio-inspired ideas for businesses or built environment under COVID? You are looking into how do we change supply chains. That's one of the things. The way I'm seeing is looking at this decentralized systems, and we tend to build big manufacturing hubs and then try and distribute. So you're seeing that with blockages in supply chains now because countries aren't selling things out. But if we actually look into this decentralized system, it's almost a hub of hubs or systems of systems I was mentioning, you can allow for lack of breakages. You're always going to have some supply somewhere to distribute. So think about, we all order stuff from Amazon. We shouldn't as much because it's not as ethical as you think. But you have smaller hubs. The packages go to regional distribution centres, and then they go to another one, and then last mile delivery should be less likely cars, but then almost what they're doing in the Netherlands and some places in the UK, which is cargo bikes and electric vehicles to then distribute it around. I think you're seeing this very much as a movement forward, this kind of last mile delivery of stuff. We also need to start thinking about lockdown issues. How are we going to design houses? How are we going to design spaces that are more air, water, things that allow access to the natural world that are not as cramped and confined? And I think that's another great way to actually look under, for any future lockdown issues. I mean, one of the examples being is when the last pandemic in the early 20th century, how the changes to housing stock came about in New York by everyone gathering together. Right, I'll take one more question if anyone wants to fire one through. Somebody said that they were looking at how to collect basically holistic systems design. Okay, one person wants to ask me about Lavassa Hill Station. Yeah, so I did some research on this when I was doing my master's actually, and they looked into how do you create basically a community in a rural area of India that could then minimising the stresses in the ecosystems by building in basic places to. So it flooded quite a lot in monsoon seasons. So they were very much designing for getting water either stored for the dry season or getting water runoff. So they looked into types of ants that are in the local area and how they actually designed the entrance to their nest to get water away from that, which they built into the infrastructure. And they even worked with the architects and engineers at HOK to redesign roof tiles to make water run off more quickly so it would actually then, they could then go and store it as well. But they very much built this kind of big ecosystem services model. I think the project code name was FIT, F-I-T. You'll find some of it there. And you'll do some digging, but there are a number of other projects that were linked with HOK around the world. I believe there's a project in South America, I do apologise, and in China as well. I know from other places they're now actually working on projects with interfacing forward about how do you create new factories of the future. So there's a couple of questions here about energy regeneration and energy. How do we consider, or does the energy generated matter, or even small scale energy regeneration? One of the key things here is about storing energy, and that's part of the thing, is not letting energy waste. And if you start looking into ways to store that, whether it's examples in the States where they push trains up a hill and then let energy come back down, or looking into ways that they, hydropower stations, when there's excess water and last demand, they pump the water back up again, so then you can actually capture that again. I do think it's a very, very valuable way of looking into that and actually storing it either through heat bricks or various foams or meshes, because it allows you to capture that to use for something else. Part of the circular system and circular economy very much is transferring into something else. A great example for heat energy, you could use the excess heat to grow materials that are biomass, and they could use them to feed in, or example like British Sugar would pump the excess CO2 or and heat into hot greenhouses to make hothouse tomatoes, and then once that wasn't as economic, they actually started growing medical grade marijuana by pumping this in as well. And question somebody asked here, this is the last one on the shark skin, to go back to that one. Yes, it was 10 microns. And you were asking why have they not looked at golf ball indents. So aircraft manufacturers have looked into indentation and also the shark skin material, but the key thing here is the trade-off between, it's more effective to put on the aircraft, but it's so expensive to manufacture that you end up, it doesn't matter anyway. Not that many aircraft are flying anyway, we can just go stare at them, they could be made out of chocolate. So but yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's actually talking about golf balls, but I use in my talk, so just explaining how golf balls actually fly more effectively as they got more and more beaten up in the early days. Now it's an art and a science. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for tuning in. For those of you who had issues getting on the system, we will hopefully, to the organisers, send out a recap and you can watch that. I will turn the comments on in YouTube. And yeah, this is Richard from York. Peace out.